Thank you.
Yes.
I just have a handful of matters, Dr. Martlew, to ask you about. First of all, in relation to the J system and post-transfusion jaundice. You said in your evidence that very few cases were notified to you. In those circumstances, why was a two-strike approach taken rather than simply removing a donor from the donor panel?
Many transfusion recipients receive contributions from a very large number of donors, depending what the products are and depending what their underlying condition is. And so, in the absence of any positive evidence that a donor was implicated, they were returned to the panel at that time.
You said that a sample would be retested for hepatitis B using the J system.
Yes.
What thought was given to the fact that the post-transfusion report might relate to non-A, non-B hepatitis and so wouldn't test positive on further investigation?
That they would be called in for ALT screening.
So that's what...
And that's not, completely robust, but that was the basis of excluding them at that time.
And then in relation to the HIV screening tests that you started to use in August 1985, you said in your evidence that you had to ask those donors for written consent in advance of other donors because they were having additional testing. That might suggest that only some donors were selected for testing using the HIV screening test. Is that right, or were all donations screened?
In the same way that there was some pilot testing of the kits for HIV screening, as there was for hepatitis C, the samples for those investigations were provided from the plasmapheresis donors, partly because they were actually giving their contributions in the blood centre, and because there was a policy decision that when HIV screening was introduced, that everybody should be asked for their informed written consent. Those donors had to give their consent in advance of the rest. And then when the routine screening started in October, everybody signed their informed written consent, having looked at the updated leaflet saying your blood's going to be tested.
And then finally, in relation to transfusion committees, we spoke about the consultants from your centre sitting on a number of the transfusion committees of the hospitals in your region. Was the practice of donor service consultants, transfusion service consultants, was that a national practice for consultants to sit on transfusion committees?
I believe so. It was encouraged. Originally, there was a suggestion you should have a regional transfusion committee and a number of hospital transfusion committees, but certainly I think in practice many of us found it to start with. It was more effective at the hospital level because of the individual details, and what people wanted and what people were getting. And then subsequently, I think there was later a regional transfusion committee.
And when you say it was recommended, who recommended that practice?
I can't remember if it came from the National Directorate or the Department of Health, to tell you the truth. But I think it was something like that. But obviously very much encouraged at the scientific meetings, The idea came from us and from the hospitals.
And then finally, we spoke about the AIDS leaflet that was provided by Dr. Shepherd to clinicians to be provided on to patients who were receiving a transfusion. What other involvement did the Liverpool Centre have in encouraging clinicians to provide information to patients about the risks of transfusions?
Well, this was the sort of thing, amongst others, that was discussed at hospital transfusion committees, and there were many drafts and updates of the patient consent leaflet, which was very useful, actually, to help clinicians in talking to their patients about it. These were, I think, provided from the NBS and then on a national basis, and then provided to hospitals in the sort of quantities they thought they would use them in.
And so I'm asked to ask you if a patient wasn't informed of the risks associated with blood transfusion, would you view that as rather poor practice?
Well, yes, but in line with any other form of treatment where it was recommended without the pros and cons being discussed.
Thank you. I have nothing else that's been raised by the core participants. Sir Brian, do you have questions for Dr. Martlew?
Well, I do. It's because I've asked a number of questions as we've gone along. This is just one area, but it really arises out of this. You tell me in your statement, your written statement, that you were first a haematologist as such when you were a registrar in haematology starting in January 1979, I think at Wythenshawe. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, I was a registrar there, yeah.
And then you said you went to be a senior registrar and so on. So your association with haematology goes back to 1979, and so you will be aware of what was current in the profession at that time and from then on, if you can remember it.
If I can remember it, yes.
But it's in that light that I want to ask you about what you say at paragraph 45. It's WITN 4034001, page 11, internally page 11, but paragraph 45. Can we manage to get that up?
Yes.
Thank you. And you're expressing here a belief. The reason I asked you about your qualifications in haematology is that...
Just a moment. Can I just check that Dr. Martlew can see it, because it's not come up on my screen yet?
No, it's coming out big in front of the little writing for me.
Good.
It's 3 sizes I've got of it.
Have you got it, Miss Fraser-Bunn?
I do now, yes.
You do. The reason I asked you about being a haematologist was it gives you, as it were, a basis, a proper standing to have a belief about this area, as opposed to just having a layman's or a person's opinion. And you're expressing there a belief. Is that still your belief?
I think so, because, following on from Lord Owen, if there'd been one body with funding and professionally advised, I think it might have been possible, but I really don't have the experience to know, what the lead time would be to plan and build a factory with the functions of BPL has at the time. But clearly the commercial competitors were making the product, so it wasn't completely novel technology. Do you know what I mean?
And nearer to the originally planned opening of BPL, that would be really putting the opening of the revamped BPL towards the beginning of the very beginning of the 1980s.
That's right.
And your view from the donor perspective, I think you expressed at paragraph 46. You plainly see, I'm putting words in your mouth, but tell me if it's right or not, please, that there wouldn't have been a problem with producing the plasma necessary to feed into BPL in order to produce enough product.
I would hope not, because my experience was that what we call the machine donors, the plasmapheresis donors, and indeed those who give platelets, were enormously enthusiastic donors and, very committed to providing for patients. And they could attend a lot more often.
And if you had to do that by machine in the early 80s, I think you were saying earlier this morning, did I hear this correctly, that you had albeit a relatively crude machine by comparison with more modern ones later, but you had a machine which would have conducted plasmapheresis in 1979?
I operated a cell separator, which is a centrifugal cell separator to collect white cells myself during 1979 at Manchester Royal Infirmary. Not every hospital had one, and this was therapeutics, but I was working at Wythenshawe at the time. And the technology allows one to collect plasma by centrifugal separation method.
Yes.
I mean, I would doubt that that particular machine was robust enough to work on the sort of scale that the plasmapheresis donor machines did, but they were improving all the time.
Yes. Well, that's very helpful, because it's useful to get it from the perspective, as it were, of somebody whose work was donor-facing as opposed to recipient-facing. Though you make the point, I think, in paragraph 46, that's the last sentence there, about what you saw as inspiring the significance of national self-sufficiency.
Oh yes, and the donors were really committed to that.
They were.
As it was explained to them.
Right.
Oh yeah. I mean, to come from, in your lunch hour, once a fortnight in the middle of a busy working day for years and years and years, I think is some commitment.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know if there are any more questions that arise out of that exchange.
No, sir. Dr. Martlew, I don't know if you have anything you would like to add.
Well, I'd just like to put on record the respect and admiration I have for the blood donors and transfusion recipients with whose care I've been concerned over many years. And in particular, I'd like to mention those with bleeding disorders such as haemophilia, for the courage and good humour which they showed in despite of the repeated tragedies that had affected so many of them and their families, on all this on top of the pain and suffering which they had with their original condition. I believe that in challenging, at times quite overwhelming circumstances, the professionals involved in their care acted for the most part out of the best of good intentions and in good faith. Where we collectively and individually let our patients down, I am truly and deeply sorry. I'm aware that the work of this inquiry is exceptionally sensitive and difficult, but of the utmost importance for the future, and I wish it well in this important work.
Well, thank you very much from my perspective for those words. And thank you for doing your bit to contribute to the information that we've had. It's been very helpful. It's been given with a degree of humour, but a lot of frankness and every appearance to me of being candid. And I just want to thank you for your contribution, which it really is, which gives us, helps us to see more of the whole picture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, there is no tomorrow.
There is no tomorrow.
Well, in the sense of there is no witness tomorrow, as we had originally planned a witness who's unable to attend.
Indeed. The inquiry sits next on Tuesday, and we'll be hearing from Dr. Wagstaff.
So Dr. Wagstaff next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Thank you very much.